In this episode, we catch up with The Doors as they release their second album in 1 year, their sophomore effort, Strange Days. Stay with us. Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast. If you're watching us on YouTube, do us a favor. Go ahead and hit the like button and then also hit the subscribe button. It helps to support the channel. If you're on YouTube, you know that it's an important part of our growth in the video space. Eric, is that a fair assessment?
Yes, but did you just say chattel?
Yeah, YouTube channel. That's what it's called.
That's what it's called? Okay.
Channel. Yeah, we have a. That's
you said chattel.
No, chattel.
Like chattel, you know.
Chattel is Yodle's illegitimate daughter. Was Chattel.
Yeah.
And if you don't know who Yodle is, you're not watching enough Star Wars.
Right.
How are you doing, Eric?
I'm doing good. Yourself?
I'm good. Listen, do you hear that?
Do I hear what? I hear nothing.
Exactly. There are no guests on this episode.
That's right.
When was the last time we went like guest frenzy, and we've had like almost like we can't be alone anymore.
No.
But here we are. But here we are.
Well, it's the music, right? We haven't done a music one in a while.
Yeah.
I think
not
that's
what we did Pearl Jam with guests, right?
That's true.
Here we are, alone at last.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, I was thinking about that today. I'm like, wow, okay, there's actually no one else. So I'm actually going to have to talk.
Right?
Jesus. So anyway, thank you for joining us each week. If you're finding us for the first time, it's usually as disorganized as it sounds, but that's half the fun, is that we talk about the music and movies that shaped our lives and hopefully stuff that you connect with. And if not, you come on the journey with us and check out some of the stuff that we like. So we thank you, each and every one of you individually.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying it to everybody at once, but it's an individual for each person.
That's right.
Customized.
Least,
thank you, blank.
We would like to think so in our heads anyway.
Yeah, fill in the blank. Thank you,
every
blank.
person. Just so thank you, one and all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. We can't do it all, but we do thank you and appreciate it. And spread the word. Mm-hmm. Sharing is caring, like the Care Bears say, like we always say. That help us out. Like I said, if you're on YouTube, throw a subscribe our way. That will help. If you're listening to us, go ahead and share it on your socials, or if you're someone that's looking for an interesting and quirky podcast, I think we fit the bill.
Yeah. And
we throw in a decent amount of information too.
We do. We take
that seriously.
I don't know. Yeah, I think we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. To say that it's useless information, I just,
No, it's not useless. It's stuff that we take it. We take that part of it seriously. We don't, we have a good time with the content.
We do.
But we certainly take the presentation of the information seriously. Meaning we don't we don't cut corners. We don't go to the guy down on the corner and say, "Hey, tell me about this. Right? What do you know about this movie?"
Yeah.
I don't know that there is a guy in the corner that provides that. If there is,
Rocky's
if there is, I haven't found him yet. But
it's like that guy that comes out of the alleyway, bum from the dark. Hey, good job, you bum. He ends up being a singer. See,
you start a bum.
Start a bum. Yeah.
Anyway, let's get to it. We're going to be talking.
Before we do, look what I have in my hand. This is my brand new mug, courtesy.
That is a great mug
of our brand new shop.
Yeah,
that Dean founded.
Go to our shop. It's retrolifegifts.etsy.com,
yep.
And we've got not just logo stuff, because not everyone wants to wear podcast stuff, but a lot of cool designs that are all original designs that we have there, so you can support the show that way too. We're really just shilling.
Yeah.
This is gonna be like QVC pretty soon. We're just gonna be showing the products. So that's gonna be the episode. Is
notice the sheen on the mug, the craftsmanship of it. Anyway.
And episode 127, the spring collection, and it's just gonna be like a QVC episode of just the stuff.
That's right.
We'll need to get some models and stuff, but
right. Yeah.
Anyway, this is our second crack at a Doors album.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, this is this was one you were interested in doing, right?
Yeah.
This was now. First of all, I need to fix a wrong that's been 2 years that it's been bothering me.
Okay.
For 2 years, it's been bothering me. on our LA Woman episode, which was like our third episode.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I committed an almost unforgivable sin, and I need to correct it now.
Okay.
I called the album previous to LA Woman, I called it Roadhouse Blues. It's Morrison Hotel. I was nervous. We were early in podcasting. I was just a skinny little kid who didn't know anything and was afraid in front of the microphone. And I referred to Morrison Hotel as Roadhouse Blues. The album is Morrison Hotel.
Morrison Hotel.
An error correction 2 years in the making.
Oh. Well, I mean, it's great that you were thinking about it all this time, I suppose. But
that's not a good thing.
Nobody called you out on it, right?
No, I called myself out when I listened to it. I'm like, Roadhouse Blues.
Go back. Yeah.
Hell's your problem, man? What's with you, man?
Listen, a lot of those early episodes we did, where there's a lot of, flubs. There's a lot of things that I think
for a self-avowed like Doors fanatic, that's unforgivable. You know.
I don't know. I don't know about that.
How do you show your face at work the next day? You can't.
How dare you, sir? How dare
I've been hiding for 2 years from certain people because of I'm afraid of a confrontation about it.
You actually wanted to do Morrison Hotel. I think when we started talking about doing another Doors, you were like, let's do Morrison Hotel. And I was like, well, I like Strange Days.
Yeah.
It's my problem. I guess you see, that's the thing. There's no bad Doors album. No,
this was a good choice though. If we
my favorite, I think it's pretty much my favorite of theirs. Yeah.
Really? Yeah. I think it's a good contrast. If we had done Morrison Hotel, those two are too close to each other and too
similar. Yeah.
Yeah, that's similar in or they were getting close to being similar. Let's get with the stats with this, and then we'll get into this one, which is this is a good one. They're all great, but anyway, this was released in September of 1967. So I was born already.
We
celebrating a birthday in September of that year.
Yeah.
This was produced by Paul Rothchild. He produced all of the Doors albums up until the last one.
Mm-hmm.
Up until LA Woman, and then the relationship just exploded. There were only 2 singles released from this album. People Are Strange, which hit number 12. Love Me 2 Times hit number 25. Wow. Thought they were, People Are Strange, sure, number 12. Love Me 2 Times. I didn't realize it was that far down in the charts. Did hit number 3 on the Billboard album charts. And it only went 1 times platinum. This was actually the poorest selling Doors album.
Of course,
platinum means 1 million copies.
Of course, it is.
There's just out of all the Beatles albums, there's got to be one that's the worst selling. So, in every artist, there's going to be a worst selling. Just to what degree is this the worst selling?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I didn't look it up. Is it by millions? Is it off that much, or is it is the next one 2 million? I didn't look that up, but it is the least sell. I don't want to say worst selling.
Yeah,
it sold the least amount of copies because I don't want worst to be a connotation that this is a bad album because it is decidedly not.
No, but there's of course critics. A few, they one person pointed out that it was like their worst selling, and I guess the way he put it was not in a terribly good way. He wasn't being polite. Let's put it that way.
It's have a positive connotation when you say it's the worst selling album.
Right. But of course it's the worst thing for, because it's always, I always tend to pick the worst of everything, right? All my favorite movies are they didn't do well at the box office, but they're all stuff. I mean, it's, this particular album, because it's just weird, I guess. I don't know why it's, it has that sort of, we'll get into that.
It's not that far off. I mean, this is not like, this album is certainly not an outlier. And the way I thought of it, like when revisiting this album, is the Doors made six studio albums. They actually made 9, but they made 3 after Jim Morrison died. They made 2 without him, and then they made An American Prayer, which isn't really a Doors album. It's the poetry. They put music to it. A lot of whatever.
Yeah.
They made 6 studio albums with Morrison. it's very easy. This is a really simple equation. The first two albums, their debut, The Doors and Strange Days, are the same. It's the same kind of trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
The next two, Waiting for the Sun and The Soft Parade, are like their pop era. There's a little more pop ears, Hello, I Love You and Touch
Mm-hmm.
Me. And then Morrison Hotel and LA Woman are them evolving into a blues band, right? So it's very easy to kind of take their discography, because it was only 6 albums, and it does match really well, because
Mm-hmm.
most of the songs on this album were written during their, when they were a new band, when they were working on their debut. So this is kind of, and I think that's the way it is with a lot of bands, right? Is they have, when they get signed, they have a wealth of material. You pick the best for your album.
Mm-hmm.
If it gets popular, you got to get something out pretty quick. And this is what happened with the Doors. Is their first album, this came out in September of 1967. Their debut came out in January of the same year.
Yeah.
So it kind of took off, Light My Fire, all that kind of stuff. And so they went right back into the studio. So they had this material, the stuff that they didn't use for the most part, to pull from. So that's why these, they're very similar. This kind of continues the psychedelic pop,
Mm-hmm.
or psychedelic rock that the Doors, they would start transitioning in the next album away from this.
Yeah.
The first two albums are very much of that psychedelic sounding pop music.
Yeah. This one is decidedly, I think, well, it's as if to say, hey, we're not done yet. We're not done with our debut. So we have all this other stuff that we might have wanted to put on the original album, if but there were a few songs on the original album that you might think that, well, it's a little bit different than what, say, The End, and there's some some a lot of psychedelia on there, but this album to me is like from beginning to end is one complete thought. It's like a mood. It's more of a mood piece. Like the entire album says pretty much the same thing. Like every song is of the same style, or or genre, if you want to call, want to say that. But it's just it definitely, you could consider this a concept album of sorts, because of the darkness of it. And they kind of just, we need to get this out because maybe they knew psychedelia wasn't going to last. It would be gone in just a couple of years. I guess it kind of transitioned to more prog, kind of took off and did other things with it and that kind of thing. Groups were writing 25-minute long songs. Here they did it in I was looking at the time signatures on all these songs, and there's no, except for the last track, no song exceeds 3.5 minutes.
Yeah, they're in and out with these.
That's right.
Which is again, that's pretty much the way the Doors were. Their stock and trade was close the album with an epic song. And if you look at the Doors discography, the 6 albums they put out, without exception, the last song is the longest to varying degrees. You've got The End, which is 10 or 11 minutes. You've got When the Music's Over on this, which is 10 or 11 minutes.
Yeah.
5 to 1 isn't as long on the next album, on Waiting for the Sun, but it's the longest song on the album. And then on The Soft Parade, you've got The Soft Parade, which is an epic, and Maggie McGill, which isn't a terribly long song, but it's the longest on the album. And of course, Riders on the Storm. So that was kind of their thing, was, doing an album and then having this expansive thing at the end, which was really more kind of attuned to what their live experience was. It was more free form. That final song would always be a little bit more free form, a little more improvisational, just kind of going wherever. Morrison could expand on lyrical content, and then the band could also expand musically. It just wasn't all Morrison on those longer songs. Actually, sometimes it was more the accents and the backing that the other Doors were providing as well. So
it definitely took you somewhere on these songs too. I mean, you're even on the studio material. I mean, as you listen to it on in a room, even you're just kind of like you don't even have to use it. You don't need anything to help enhance the experience of some of this stuff. So I always appreciated that about their music.
Yeah. And the big difference between this one and the first album and this album is stylistically and sonically they're the same, but the first album was recorded on 4 tracks. what happened in between the recording of this album and of the debut album and Strange Days was Sgt. Pepper.
They heard Sgt. Pepper.
They heard Sgt. Pepper, and they got their hands on an 8-track. So
Mm-hmm.
they started to then experiment with, and you can hear it. There's a lot of backwards cymbal work from John Densmore on some of the songs. It's like
Mm-hmm.
like it's backwards. So they're fooling around with that. Processing, Morrison's vocals through a Moog synthesizer, or Moog. I think
Moog. I think it's Moog.
I read it as Moog, but everyone pronounces it as Moog.
Okay.
Processing his vocals through that, and just, they really went for that experimentation, which gives this one that trippier feel than the first. Even though the first album, it's kind of like the bare bones versions of psychedelic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now that they're into 8 tracks, you really like a song like Strange Days. It sounds like it's recorded underwater. It has like this really warbly feel, because Morrison was singing through the synthesizer, and the guitars have that weird chord. For the first album, Paul Rothchild didn't want Robbie Krieger to use any effects. He was just like, "Oh, I don't want this to be overused." He's very controlling.
Mm-hmm.
So for the second album, they kind of got the toolbox. They're like, "Okay, let's kind of start fooling with this, and let's kind of we've got all these tracks to use, and we're inspired, and we're seeing other bands do it. So let's jump in." And this is kind of like their Sgt. Peppery kind of album, meaning as far as experimentation goes, because they would kind of pull it back after this, dial it more towards straightforward stuff.
Yeah, that's probably why I like it so much, because it has that, because we're both into the sort of experimental in kind of stuff that we always talk about, but this is that album for me. And this was the album, like you mentioned, Robbie Krieger. This is what made me take notice of him as a guitar player. Some of the things he was doing on his guitar. It sounds like a vocal, like it's like there's parts of the song where you swear it's a voice, and it's his guitar, like this weird sort of, he's using a bottleneck slide, but he's using it just to accent certain, things. And I think it's just great. But
they kind of started to kind of, they were gigging, they were like the house band at the Whiskey, which is one thing. But then when you start becoming a recording act, it's a little bit different, and there's some different disciplines that you need. So, their debut, as strong as it was, I think, this didn't sell as much, but I think it's just as powerful. When you've got Moonlight Drive,
mm-hmm.
which was like the first, that's like the origin of the Doors. The famous origin story is Morrison and Ray Manzarek met on the beach, and I want to start this band, and Morrison's like, I've got these lyrics, and it was Moonlight Drive, which they'd recorded earlier, but just they recorded it for the debut. It wasn't satisfied with it, or and they re-recorded it. And it's just got a classic. You've got classics like that on here. And Love Me, like I said, Love Me Two Times and People Are Strange. I mean, those are, People Are Strange is like the psychedelic anthem of the '60s. You don't need much more than People Are Strange.
That's right.
To really drive it home in the '60s what was going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting too. Like you mentioned, Strange Days, about his Morrison putting his vocals through the synthesizer. It's in the remix of the album, like the I think it was the 50th anniversary, they actually separated his voice from that. It's interesting to note that and I didn't like that. I didn't like that they did that. I like that weird effect. As soon as he starts to sing, you really can't. His voice is like right in the middle of that weird, like like that, that's like warbly kind of thing. And I have to be honest. A lot of the remixes I don't care for.
Really, I don't all the remixes. I was loving them.
They did back then, like 2008, because they were totally different. I'm talking about the anniversary editions now.
Oh, okay,
the latest ones.
They did the 40th anniversary.
Those are amazing, because you hear stuff you've never heard before.
I forgot what it was.
Yeah, but every album had and it was
those were remixed, and vocals were brought up, and you heard things that you didn't hear, and different, and it had some extra tracks. I like those.
It's exciting because that stuff sounded new. It sounded fresh. It sounded almost like they updated their sound to make it sound like a modern band.
Yeah, the masters must have been in really good shape, because they sounded. I remember playing, and unfortunately, we can't get you too hyped up about it, because those are not available on streaming services. Unfortunately, if you go to listen on Spotify, you're just going to hear the standard That's one of the bad things about streaming. Is the good thing is you can get almost anything, but then the bad thing is you actually can't get everything because there are some of these these remixed releases. We talked about it in our Pet Sounds episode. The box set was available, then it's gone, and it's got
there is the only thing they do have on, I think, on Spotify. They have the compilation is The Future Starts Here, and I think it's just the greatest hits, but with that remix. So because I've listened to both that, but you're right, they don't have all the albums remixed,
which would be great.
It would be, yeah.
That's one check mark for Eric of the purveyor of owning the physical media and having it, right? I mean, I have them. I just have to dig them out. I did rip them, but but yeah. So we don't want to get you too hyped up on that and say, oh, they're talking about the remixes, but I can't.
Because since then they've re-released these albums as anniversary editions, and I don't care for them. I don't care for what they did. The original. I'd rather listen to the original album, the original mix, and it's better. It's just better.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So from the catastrophic career decision file, starting with the first album, that the Doors are a 4-piece band, but not the typical 4-piece. You've got a vocalist, you've got a keyboardist, a guitarist, and a drummer, and you don't have a bass player.
Yeah.
And Ray Manzarek would play the bass notes with his left hand, which was great. It's great for live stuff, but in the studio they started to use a bass player starting from the first album to augment the sound. This gentleman Larry Knechtel from Pet, he played on Pet Sounds. He was one of the Wrecking Crew. He played on the first album, as did this gentleman called by the name of Doug Luban. Doug Luban played, I think, on 7 out of the 10 tracks on this album.
Yeah.
He was in a band called Clearlight at the time, which was also being produced by Paul Rothchild. The Doors said, "Hey, Doug, you know what? We want to make you a member. We want to make you a member of the Doors. Like, we need let's just get a bass player." Nah, I'm going to stay with Clearlight. I'm sorry, who the fuck is Clearlight? Because I've never heard of them before. Like. Never.
Yeah,
I mean, he would continue to play on the Doors albums. He would play bass on. He would be on Waiting for the Sun. He would be on Morrison Hotel and Soft Parade to a lesser extent. Then once they got to L.A. Woman, you had Jerry Sheff, but this guy just turned it down. Oddly enough, you know where he reappeared? He became Billy Squier's bass player.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
If you go look up Billy Squier and Doug Luban, you'll recognize him. I recognize him from Billy Squier because he was like a kid. He was like 20 years old when he was playing with the Doors. He was like really young.
Yeah.
So by the time he got to Billy Squier, he was only in his 30s. Well, he was still a young guy.
That might explain. Well, I don't know. Maybe that explains why. Maybe he's just devoted to his. Yeah. Was it his band? Did he start that?
Who cares? I'm sorry. I believe he's deceased. So rest in peace. But the Doors are asking you to be to join their band,
right? Yeah. Well,
Clearlight. I've never even heard of them. So it's not even like, oh, this is like a, this, that, or the other thing type of band that maybe had a hit. I've never even heard of them. And he's like, oh, I'm going to stay with Clearlight. It's like, all right, you do that.
See ya.
Yeah, I know. I mean, they kept, wow. So I mean, he may as well just have joined because they continued to use him album after album because they needed that rounded, and you can hear it on Strange Days, especially now because in 8 tracks, you really hear that there's a bass player there. Ray Manzarek is really getting the support. It's great for on tour if you're going to go bare bones, but they even used bass players on tour as well.
And there's an isolated bass on some of these songs.
Yeah,
too. Like those
your lost little girl is all bass.
That's all. That's right. Yep.
Yeah, that's all bass. That song. It's like doom 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 doom. It's like that is not a keyboard.
Yeah,
right. That is absolutely not a keyboard. So they, the Doors weren't so regimented that they're like, okay, this is what our band is. Where they needed that support. They took it and it just rounded out their sound too. I just think it really helped having a bass player on the studio stuff. Just kind of, you don't have to go it alone like that, and even Ray Manzarek realized that. He goes, it's just not it's not full enough, and it doesn't flow like playing the bass notes on the keyboard doesn't flow the way a bass player does. So they had Doug doubling Ray Manzarek on that stuff, which
it
really
takes the pressure off of Ray Manzarek too. I mean, you're trying to do this stuff live, and you're trying to, you know what I mean. So it's kind of, he's trying to be creative as it is, playing things like the harpsichord. Like, who plays harpsichord in a rock and roll band, right? I mean, that is such an odd instrument to incorporate into this stuff, but he did it, and so he was on the cusp of why would I want to worry about bass? It's like the bass notes, and he gets somebody who could do that better than I can, because all I'm doing is just keeping the rhythm.
Very rudimentary stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Ray Manzarek, where does he fit in? No, you never hear anybody talk about. You never hear anybody really talk about great keyboardists anyway. You always hear great guitarists, and you hear great drummers.
It's usually in
you never hear talk about great keyboardists. Where does he fit in?
No,
is he forgotten?
I don't. If anybody were to talk about great keyboard, especially in the rock vein, he would probably be one of the first people that people would mention, I'm sure.
Is it the same as playing the piano? I mean, is he the same as a Billy Joel and an Elton John?
Or is he like
Is he a Keith Emerson?
Yeah,
and a Tony Banks. Is it where is Ray Manzarek in there?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it would have to depend on his composing duties as well. I think a lot of these keyboardists, they tend to stand out a little bit more because they're actual composers. They go on to do, like, people like Tony Banks, they go on to do like orchestral arrangements and things like that. Ray
he did some soundtrack work, Ray Manzarek.
Yeah, he was pretty, I would say he was pretty solid in just in the rock vein. And you probably hear a lot more talk about jazz keyboardists. I mean, that's more their realm, I think. Because with jazz, it's like they stand out more than, I think, probably jazz guitar. At least it used to be that way in the old days. And I consider like Ray Manzarek more of a jazz player. Like him.
Jazz and blues.
Him and Densmore, definitely. I think they're.
So where do you put Densmore?
Oh,
he's an acquired taste. I like John Densmore, but he's not a pocket drummer.
No.
He fit with the Doors because the Doors were so improvisational that he could get away with the stuff that he would do. If he was in any other band, he probably wouldn't fit. Like he was just too out of the pocket and too everybody came from like a different discipline. So he was really kind of jazzy.
Yeah.
Robbie Krieger was kind of flamenco and finger style, and Ray was kind of like blues. And you have these three ingredients that don't really mix, but together it made sense because they all kind of they all gave each other the room to breathe.
Yeah,
and especially on this album, you hear Densmore's got some, he's always got strange stuff going on especially on strange days.
That's what's so great about this band. They're so unique, musically speaking, and that's why everybody's always about Morrison, and I love Morrison and what he was all about, and sometimes I felt like he was full of shit. I think I mentioned this on LA Woman, I didn't. It's easy to buy into the mystique of Jim Morrison. Sure. He's a sexy guy. He's got this poetry thing going on and, that kind of thing. But I think the fact that he was more or less a crooner adds to that as well. Right. I mean, it's like he wasn't a straight out like singer, so to speak. Like he's like, his voice was always very in a low register. He was always like, he was.
I don't think this would have worked with a straight ahead.
There were just
band behind him.
Well, like you say, there's so many different extremes to this band. Like they never do anything quite the same.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it work. Is that's
right.
If you put a straight ahead rock combo behind him, I don't know what that would sound like. Part of the Doors, the mystique of the Doors is that the music sounds so strange as well and dark.
That's right.
The music itself gets dark to match, especially like when the music's over. That is just so, like Densmore's doing his own thing, his own fills, and then Robbie Krieger's just doing like little just really small little licks.
Well,
they're all like in their own zone, but then the zones kind of come together, and then Morrison is just kind of laying just laying lines of poetry over it that
yeah.
It's not even really music. It's more like like something when the music's over isn't really music. It's more like a piece of art.
Yeah,
because it's so abstract. It's such an abstract thing. It goes back to the themes of a standard song, but just like the soft parade and the end, those pieces are more like artistic statements than they are like
for sure. Yeah,
like
sure.
oh, we're gonna make a record and we're gonna put the horns. We're gonna do this and that. It's like it's not regimented like Pet Sounds or Sergeant Pepper. They're using the technology, but they're using it in a different way.
It's funny, because my my oldest son, the Doors are his favorite band.
Welcome aboard.
They used to be it used to be the Beatles, but now he heard the Doors and he was gone. So he just loves this band, but he doesn't like Soft Parade. He's like, I can't stand with the. I said, really? Yeah, but that was part of the process, though. That was part of their things that they would do something different like that. They would add horns, they would add strings, they weren't.
It's got Wild Child on it. How could you not?
They weren't afraid to go there. And that's what's exciting about this band. It was that they're constantly moving. And I would say, you mentioned Art. Yeah, they're probably one of the first art rock bands. This is pre-prog, but they were able to do this stuff in a 3-4 minute song, which is astounding to me. Yeah. I think better than the Beatles in my opinion, because this stuff was just they took it so somewhere else. It was so out there. And
it dealt more with the Beatles were more like experimentation and pushing the boundaries of songwriting, of creating. The Doors occupied a different space. Like that was, and it's funny. It's funny what you just said about your son, because I went through that, and I had my Beatles period, and it was all Beatles all the time. And I remember distinctly thinking to myself, well, what else is there? Like, if the Beatles are the greatest band, and I've consumed everything I could about them, then what is left?
Yeah.
And little did I know, I would get into, after the Beatles, I got into the Doors. Heavily into the Doors, and then after the Doors, I'm like, well, what else is left? Like I kept on questioning after I had those phases. I'm like, well, what's after this? Little did I know it would be the Beach Boys. It would it would kind of leapfrog, but it would leapfrog backwards. It would skip over the Beatles and go even earlier. So it's the discovery of music is an interesting thing. Just when you think you're done, even when I was questioning it, I'm like, well, if the Beatles are the best thing and I've already gotten into them, what else is there? And it's like, well, there's more out there. It's and the Doors occupy a different headspace, a different state of mind, and a different kind of
that's right.
I don't really listen to like the Beatles and then the Doors. Like I listen to the Beatles, like you listen to the Beatles, you're listening to the Beatles. And then I want to go listen to the Doors. It's something different. I'm not going to put on I'm not going to put on Rubber Soul, then put on Morrison Hotel or something like that. It's just, it does. It's not the same. It's the same decade, same era, but it's almost like different genres, just because of the material. The Doors weren't afraid to go to those dark places.
It's always interesting to note the Beatles could very well be considered the greatest band ever.
Sure, we'll say it.
And but the point is that the fact is that there were other bands already at the same time doing their thing as well, and they might have credited the Beatles like, oh, they made a masterpiece, but we're already working on our own stuff too. So I don't feel like any of these bands get that kind of acknowledgement from rock critics or they never get everything. Everybody owes everything to the Beatles, and I don't agree with that. I feel like everybody has their own point of view. Certainly, this band had their something completely, like you just mentioned, something completely different, another space, and the psychedelic thing. Yeah, the way the technique, the recording techniques, Beatles might have done it first. But also, like, it surprises me too that it took a while for them to even get an 8-track, because they were already using 8-track in America long before the Beatles were. So
cheap ass EMI studio or Parlophone.
Surprisingly enough, why didn't the Doors already have an 8-track
Yeah.
for their first album.
I think because I think it was done on the cheap. It was like, I think it was like $10,000 that they made the record for. So it was kind of like, you're not going to spend the big bucks on it. Back then everybody and their mother had a band, right? Everybody had a band.
True.
So everybody made, Clear Light, whoever they are, they must've made I'm sure they made a record. So you do it on the cheap. Oh, okay. Now we've got a hot commodity. Let's kind of, now there's a little bit more faith from Elektra, who was the label that the Doors were on. And it's their willingness. I'm sure if the Doors said, no, we want to, let's do the 4-track, and I'm sure the record company would be like, sure, it's cheaper, and it'll be quicker because we won't have to do all these overdubs. So I think it's also the band and what they have access to. In the beginning, you only have access to a 4-track. This is what we're making your album on. You guys got to do the best you can with it.
Yeah.
And then this other revolution happens. Like you say, the Beatles, they're always going to be the
credit for
the market. They're always going to be the marker for everything in the 60s that happened, because their evolution was so quick. It was so brilliant. It was so precise that you can't help but use them as a yardstick to measure every other band and what they were doing. So everybody's going to get overshadowed. But like I said, in this way, Strange Days in their way was their experimentation album of where they can kind of go in. Because after this, in Waiting for the Sun, which is probably one of my favorite albums after this, is much more subdued, less psychedelic, much more introspective and mellow. And
that's Zach's favorite.
And warmer. Yeah. It's not as the psychedelic stuff can be kind of, scary if you're not, just
yeah.
if you're looking for just regular pop stuff, not that it's like talking about murder except for the end. But Morrison's imagery, right? Because of the poetry he was writing, it's very abstract, and you have to. It's not like She Loves You, yeah, yeah, yeah. They did that with Touch Me, which probably why your son doesn't like it. It's so anti what the Doors were,
right?
The dark imagery, like Horse Latitudes, just the creepiest thing ever. It's kind of. The weird, the echoey piano, and it's got the horses and Morrison screaming these, these poetry lines, So the Doors weren't afraid to go to those darker places that the Beatles might just kind of glance over while they're evolving. The Beatles would kind of touch on that. Lennon would probably touch on those darker themes a little bit, and then move off, and then it would go on to the next evolution. Whereas the Doors kind of, always, even though their music. The music itself kind of changed the lyrical content of Morrison and Krieger, and because Robbie Krieger wrote a lot of these hits, kind of remained consistent. Their themes always stayed the same, I think. Whereas the Beatles, it was like, She Loves You, Hold Your Hand, and then it got to like Let It Be and some other stuff. I think the Doors had a shorter lifespan as well. And it was always just, because Morrison was like the key songwriter and the guy. You had more of a consistent message, and it was just his abstract lyrics.
But boy, what a presence they made.
Yeah.
What a their fingerprints, blows my mind that it's all happened in that short amount of time.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's done, like 6 albums. They did carry on, of course, without Jim, but it wasn't close to what they did.
No, Ray Manzarek has always tried to, fashion himself as a lead singer. He just doesn't have the only song I like that he ever sang was "You Need Me," which was which is kind of just a bluesy song. He's not and they had talked about getting Iggy Pop at the time after Morrison passed away. There was even talk of trying to get McCartney on bass, which would be just ludicrous. He would never do it. The Doors were these 4 people. Because any other guitar player is not Robbie Krieger, because he's got a particular style, and you can't just get a straight ahead drummer to fill in for John Densmore. Those 4 people are what makes like Unhappy Girl the song that it is, and I can't see your face in my mind, like these atmospheric things, because these guys are just so they're just so they're so independent. They're like independent artists. Yeah. But they work together in a group. It's so strange. They're so disconnected, You don't really hear Robbie Krieger playing along with Manzarek. Manzarek goes on his own tangents.
Yeah, they're doing their own
and
thing.
Does it, and they all do their own thing, and that's what and Morrison's doing his own thing too. So it's can't beat a horse latitude to death, but that's really the mystique of the Doors, is that they're not cohesive. But it all makes sense. Yeah, but they are because they're so because each one is so different. Each one has such a different discipline. That's the word I'm looking for. They each have a different discipline that when they come together, it just kind of becomes more of an art form than it does pop music. Which is kind of really
and that was the thing at the time too. Of course, the psychedelia that was happening, especially in California.
The airplane, Jefferson Airplane,
you had Hendrix, you had all these, you
had the Dead,
of course, so and of course these pop bands that were trying to be like the Doors too, like these one hit wonders, and they're sort of throwing this stuff out there, and it disappeared just as quick as it came. But yeah, I mean their stuff, wow, what an imprint they made. One of the most unique bands ever, and I don't. Are there any bands that sound like the Doors, do you think, modern today? Like, can anybody be... You listen to them and you say, oh, my God, that's the Doors right there. I can't think of... I'm sure there are. There has to be somebody who's trying to...
vocally, there's a couple that try and go there, famously, Eddie Vedder sat in for Morrison when the Doors got inducted into the Hall of Fame. He's one of them. Ian Astbury from the Cult toured with the Doors. It was the Doors of the 21st century. He toured extensively as the kind of quote unquote lead singer of that band. So there are plenty of people that have been influenced by him. There's no one that sounds like him because he wasn't that great of a singer. He was okay, but that wasn't the point, right? Like you said, he was kind of a crooner. He got the point across. It was more the words he was using.
Yeah, how
he wasn't such a great singer and doing different runs and stuff. That wasn't what he did. He was just out there, and like you said, sometimes the image gets in the way of that. We talked about that on the LA Woman episode, where he took steps to get away from that Lizard King clad in leather image, and started gaining weight and growing a beard, smoking cigars, and because it's harder to be taken seriously when girls are screaming and that's all they want, and they just want the image of the Lizard King, as it were. And he's trying to do something, trying to spread the message or spread the word, and then there's that contempt that grows, and of course, unchecked alcohol use, and then it just becomes a disaster. This year, this was released in September '67. I believe it was December of '67. Morrison became the first rock star to be arrested on stage in New Haven, Connecticut. And so the same year that this came out, the problems were already brewing. Where I think that arrest in December in New Haven, he got maced backstage by a cop. There was a little misunderstanding. They didn't know who he was, and then he took that rage and that ire out on stage, and kind of directed it towards the crowd and the cops, and they just and there's footage of them accosting him, and he's like wasted.
Of course,
They kind of take him off stage, and he's kind of like he doesn't even know what the hell's going on. And so he has the distinction of the first rock act or performer to be arrested on stage during a concert. So that would kind of start the beginning of the end for him.
Which would be a frustration for the rest of the band. I know Densmore especially would be.
Everybody to corral him, for the next album, for Waiting for the Sun, multiple hundreds, sometimes hundreds of takes. They would have to go through just to get him right, and they would have to have people prop him up. I mean, he was on a quick train of destruction. You're talking this was 67, 68, 3 years later, 70, 71, he's gone. This was a pretty quick flame out.
Do you think that because Manzarek and Densmore, Krieger, they were very much like, I would say, virtuosic musicians in that sense.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
so do you think Jim was intimidated by that? Do you think, at some point he realized, well, I don't measure up to these guys musically? Like you say, he wasn't the greatest singer. I write poetry.
I don't think so, because that was his thing, right? His virtuosic talent was words.
Yeah.
Right. That's what he brought. It wasn't his voice that he brought. He brought the lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
Right. He put words and emotions to the music that they were playing. Right. Those things were all symbiotic.
Yeah.
They all kind of fit together. So I don't think he was. No, I just think the trappings of success got to him. Do whatever you want whenever you want, that lifestyle. I think he romanticized alcoholism as well, and just kind of like it was a romantic way for a poet to live.
Yeah.
That whole thing, kind of really living the excess, literally.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like you said, the other three were, I'm sure they dabbled and they took their I'm sure they did. I know they did. They
of
took
course
their share of psychedelics. I mean, everybody was doing it, but he was just on a different level. And whatever demons he was wrestling with. But I don't think he felt that he was less than, because his part was the words, right? His part was verbalizing that darkness and those dark corners. And their job was it was all part and parcel together. Everything worked to create like an oral kind of diorama of what was going on, from the music, from the drums being all strange and seemingly disconnected. But when you listen to these songs, it's and that's why they've been called creepy. Depending on where you're at when you're coming from this, or what you listen to. If you listen to the Soft Parade, you might not get it. It's that's very poppy.
Mm-hmm.
But the first two albums and this one especially is, like you said, it's kind of, this one's a little bit of a, not dour, and not depressing, but kind of darker or melancholy themes, right? Well, like just the titles, your lost little girl,
unhappy girl.
I can't see your face in my mind. Yeah, unhappy girl.
Mm-hmm.
Strange days, when the music's over. So, the content is not, I want to hold your hand, she loves you.
Yeah.
Good day, sunshine. Right? It's the other side. It's the darker underbelly.
The underbelly. And it is a complete thought, like I said. And it's like, it's very thematically, it's very cohesive. Whereas, other albums that they did, they had to slip in something that they probably didn't want to slip in. That's where Krieger came in. He's like, I have to write a hit song. Maybe there's just not enough of that on the first, on their debut. They needed something to kind of off balance that, I'm sure Morrison probably wanted to put quite a few of these songs on, on the first. Can you imagine this being the first album? I don't know how, how that would have been,
Well, I mean, it was a wealth of material they had. I mean, like I said, the stuff on the previous album really wasn't that far off. I mean, End of the Night from the first album, The Crystal Ship, Soul Kitchen. I mean, some of that stuff is, again, all this stuff is just a break on through. I mean, these are just generally not poppy, sunny side of life songs, right? You just generally, you can go album to album.
Yeah.
The next album, Summer's Almost Gone, Wintertime Love, 5 to 1. I mean, their songs are generally, Until You Get to Touch Me, which Morrison really didn't want to do, or the song from Soft Parade, Follow Me Down. He didn't. Robbie Krieger wrote that. And he goes, I don't want to sing and tell people to follow me. I'm not that. I don't want to put that message out there, but they did it. So those dark themes pretty much run throughout. You can kind of, and it's like I said, it's a different, I think after going through the Beatles and going through that, it preps you maybe for the darker stuff, and that's when you get into the Doors, because you've kind of been through the Beatles experience where it's all kind of, poppy, like for the most part positive. There's not a lot of downer songs, maybe Helter Skelter. You could probably pick a handful. Even their darker stuff, like, Run for Your Life from the Beatles, it's not threatening.
Yeah.
It's kind of, it's for the Beatles, it's threatening, but when you kind of put it up against like Jefferson Airplane and some of the psychedelic stuff goes a little deeper. It goes into the psyche a little bit more.
Helter Skelter might be the extreme.
Yeah,
probably at that point, But,
yeah, happiness is a warm gun and stuff like that. But even that doesn't go as kind of creepy and weird as Airplane and as I always look at the Jefferson Airplane and the Doors kind of in tandem. They were kind of running at the same level. And kind of dealing with the same themes and kind of exploring the same musical areas, right? The stuff from Airplane wasn't
right
happy-go-lucky either. It was dark and creepy and strange and weird. That other side of it.
Yep.
Of the summer of love. There was a dark underbelly,
a dark streak of right. Exactly. Yeah.
That's what the Doors. That's what they were exploring, and I think there's absolutely, it wasn't Satanist or devil music. It was just a different, a different look at emotions and a different look at how things are perceived, which I appreciated when I was getting into them. I was like, yeah, this is just a whole other aspect of music and a whole other way to look at lyrical content and kind of pulling it apart and what is a band trying to say. Especially coming from something like the Beatles, which is very well produced, well organized, well written, well arranged, and then this is disjoint. You're getting stuff that's disjointed and just not, you're getting challenged on a different level for the music. That the Beatles would challenge you in one way, just with the experimentation and what they were doing, and this is just something. When I got into them, I was like, wow, this is just totally different.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's what it was. Is I didn't get right into the Beach Boys or another pop band right into it right afterwards, because that wouldn't have worked anyway. It's kind of like, just stumbled upon. I read the book. No one here gets out alive. Once you read that book back then, whoever read that book back when it came out, became enamored. As much of it is probably not true, and much of it is probably fiction. It was a compelling read, and it was a great. If it's a fable, it's a great fable.
Absolutely, yeah.
If it's great fiction, if 25 or 50% of it is true, whatever. It kind of grew the legend, and I read that. I'm like, oh my God, this guy, I got to, and then you kind of you go down the rabbit hole.
Densmore's book is great too.
His was good. I read that one. Supposedly Krieger's is even better. Supposedly it's a little more realistic. Densmore's was more like, very metaphysical, and I was going to acting classes and whatever. Dude.
He talks at length about like the problems that he had. His disgruntled. Because
I wish I would have told Jim this how I felt. It's like, okay,
right, exactly.
Everybody does.
Some good stories, but
give us the dirt.
Yeah, that's what you want.
We want the dirt under the fingernails. That's what we want from the Doors, because that's what they were. They were that,
Yeah.
They were that band, and they absolutely left their mark on rock and roll. And as short as it was, his image is enduring. And maybe that's the blessing and the curse, right? For when he was alive, it was a curse. Now that he's passed, that image of the young godlike, the young lion, Morrison, has become iconic. So now people see that it's still on T-shirts and in art. Who is this guy? Right? Who is he? And then that, how corny, opens the doors to finding out about them and listening to them now and getting into them.
That's what he wanted.
Who knows? I'm not sure. Who knows? I mean, I like to think if he was still alive, he probably would have been kind of like a Van Morrison, kind of, went that trajectory of kind of doing kind of straight, just kind of weird stuff, strange stuff, traditional stuff, more of the poetry. Yeah. Like kind of not really going down a standard career path, because he had nothing but opportunities available to him to do what he wanted or not wanted to do. And again, there was always talk about were they going to get back together? They were supposed to be getting back together, the Doors, and then he passed away. So that's, we covered that in the episode 3, and we're on episode 100 and something. It was like 100 episodes ago. So go,
yeah, right.
Go find that episode. It's somewhere in the back underneath the newspapers. So what are some of the highlights here for you?
For me? Oof.
Yeah.
Jeez. I don't know. I think I like Unhappy Girl. I love My Eyes Have Seen You. Was always one of my favorite tracks. Yeah. I never at the time back then when it was like, I could probably say that might've been my favorite song when we were first just getting into them. Like the three, our friend John was a big fan.
Yep.
I think we all had our particular favorites. That was probably, I didn't know which album it came from at the time. But I'm glad that it's on this particular album.
Yeah.
I Can't See Your Face in My Mind.
Yep,
I would probably, aside from Strange Days, and which is, it's hard. I like the whole, every song, there's no bad song on this record, honestly.
No, there's not.
Because you can go right through. It's like, it's not, you don't have to labor through any of these songs. It's like I said, none of them exceed 4 minutes, so it's a very easy album to listen to get through, but it's also, but you're also in for quite a ride because it has that, just that darkness to it.
Yeah.
Just enough of that.
And it's trippy.
Exactly. Yeah.
I used to really kind of not be down on it, but kind of really dismiss Moonlight Drive just because it was really a big FM staple.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't listened to this album in a while. So when I started listening to it for this episode, I'm like, and maybe I needed to miss it. Maybe that's what it was. Come listening, I'm like, wow, I'm really digging Moonlight Drive, and I normally don't. It's like, I'll take it or leave it. It's kind of like, it's one of the ones that's there. And but when I was listening to it now, I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of digging. I'm kind of digging Moonlight Drive again. I really kind of, Robbie Krieger's guitar work. Again, you're not going to go wrong with him. The guy doesn't miss a trick. He's just so fluid, and just so great. I love listening to Robbie Krieger play. He's just because he's not like any other guitar player. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what it means. It just means that he's different.
Yeah.
His solos are different. Just because of the way he plays, his flamenco style, again, like Lindsey Buckingham, it becomes you automatically become, or like Mark Knopfler, you become like a different guitar player. Mm-hmm. Because your sensibilities are coming from a different way of playing.
Well, you're serving the song. You're serving it's, you're painting that, as Lindsey would put it, it's like painting a picture, right? Yeah. It's those flourishes of what do we need here? It's not just a straight up, just guitar, lead guitar, rhythm guitar. You're talking about, it's like I said before, like in Krieger's case, you have these weird like he's just, that makes the song, whereas otherwise it would have been probably just had those little accents in the demos, which probably sounded nothing like the way it does, so those little, it lends to that. It's like a voice, almost like a background voice, like, accenting what Morrison's doing, and
the story famously is, I don't know if we covered it on the LA Woman episode, but the first time Morrison heard Robbie Krieger play slide guitar, he said, "That's all I ever want that's all I ever want on the records is slide guitars." Like, well, it can't all be, it would wear out its welcome, but he really is a great slide guitar, different than a George Harrison or different than a Clapton. He uses it in, like you said, in for accents.
These little short
for phrasing.
It's not hard. I can't imagine. That's not easy to do. You're talking about these little short bursts of to actually, know precisely where to hit the note on a bottleneck.
Yeah,
is
Wild Child. I love his guitar work on Wild Child.
Oh yeah.
Love that song.
Yeah. If we were ever to do a top guitar player episode, which would be extremely difficult,
I probably would have forgotten about him. Like, I would be so keyed in on being, figuring out somebody. Like, much like I left out John Deacon out of our bass players because he was so obvious.
Okay.
That I was trying to outthink the list. That I probably would, if you had done it, I probably would have left off Robbie Krieger. Like, I probably would have just totally blanked on him, but he absolutely would be on there. He should be on there.
I think so. Yeah, I would. That would probably be an overlap for sure.
Yeah. And it would be an oversight if I didn't have it on there. It would just be like, if you said Robbie Krieger, I would have been like, fuck. I forgot.
Because one of us would have picked him, and it
but it's just like, because they're so low key. It's like, because he didn't do it, like, it's not like
and that's the way I like it, though, man. That's the those are my favorite type of players.
That's the sin. The sin is the Doors broke up and they didn't do anything afterwards. It's not like Robbie Krieger, they kind of struggled. I mean, they kind of did stuff, but it's not like they kind of went on and not like Dave Grohl in Nirvana, like, oh, I'm going to go and just do something else. It's not like Robbie Krieger was able to latch on to something else. He made a couple of solo albums. He made a great solo album called No Habla. I think it was in the 80s, which was really great, or early 90s. But kind of because the specter and the shadow of Morrison was so big that when the band kind of extinguished, everyone else was just kind of collateral damage. Like they just kind of became footnotes, unfortunately,
Yeah.
And the guy was too good. Like, that should not, like 6 albums should not be the legacy. Again, yes, he's put out a lot of solo stuff, but no one's going to go listen to that. He's going to be known for the work that he did on these 6 albums, which are incredible, but it's not enough.
Yeah.
It's not enough. And same thing with Manzarek and John Densmore. It's not enough. And they tried to make a go of it without him, and no one's interested. It's like, it's not the same. So unfortunately, they couldn't pivot, make that adjustment and kind of course correct and do something else. It's too bad.
Yeah, it really is. Because they're just way too talented.
Yeah.
And that's, the same could be said of a lot of people out there too, just struggling to make it. They might have had their moment in the sun and just kind of fizzled out. And
not too bad.
I don't know.
Yeah. But just for highlights for me, I think you hit like your lost little girl. You can't see your face in my mind. And of course, when the music's over, that's like 5 songs in one based on the running time of the other ones. It's like getting 5. That's like getting 5 to 1.
But that was for me. I remember hearing that. I think I always liked that more than the end.
Mm-hmm.
When the music's over. I remember listening to Weird Scenes. Probably was the first Doors album I ever had, and it, fortunately, it had like a lot of this good stuff on there.
Yeah.
From
I would even go with the soft. I would go with the Soft Parade over this one as far as the epic songs too. I like. Each one that kind of amped it up a little bit, and I really like the Soft Parade. That was kind of for an album that was very poppy and that kind of like the Doors. That would be the Doors at their weakest was the Soft Parade. I really like the song, the Soft Parade. But anyway, what do you think? You think we covered all the bases on?
I think so. I think we needed to say what we needed to say, but
I'm glad we chose this one. It's a good contrast to the album that we did, which was the Doors by then a fully kind of formed blues band. No shades. There are on LA Woman. There are no shades of this album or of this band. Like this. After this album, it was pretty much shed. Like Waiting for the Sun doesn't really have a lot in common with this, although it was the next album. By LA Woman, they were a changeling. They were something entirely different. And in a good way. Like they had a short trajectory, but like I said, every two album cycles, if you look at it in 2 album chunks, you can kind of see how they metamorphosized into what they ended up with.
Yeah.
They really kind of developed in pretty short order. So they were very prolific over that time too. So 67 to 71, 6 albums. That's 4 years.
Yeah.
That's 4 years.
It's crazy. Yep.
Yeah. And that's not counting. They put out a live, Absolutely Live. And there was a couple of compilations in there thrown in too. Those don't count. But anyway, that's going to do it. That's one of our famous catchphrases. That's going to do it for this episode of the 3324 podcast. Find us on Facebook and Instagram, won't you, at 3324 podcast. A great community of people there. Like-minded music lovers, movie lovers, great hitting our stride commentary with people that really engage in the community. We invite you to be a part of that. It's free. It doesn't cost anything.
Nope.
Well, you got to pay for your internet or you got to pay for your cell phone, but
that's on you.
Outside of that, once you get through that barrier, it's free to get in. There's no height. It's not like at the amusement park, you got to be this tall or to enter. All heights, you're in.
That's right.
We accept everybody. So come join us. Find us on social media. It's a lot of fun. It's a great community. We also do live shows as well. So you can find that out too. That's a way to interact with us directly. And and meet you. Because that's what this is all about, is connecting music and memories and movies and friends and kind of talking about this and sharing our love. So did I say that succinctly? Was that good?
You absolutely did. You hit it right on the head. Couldn't have said it right myself. There's no way I could have said it any.
All right. And I didn't even write any of this down. It just rolls.
See, there you go.
Just rolls. So that'll do it. We thank you. And check out The Doors. It is available on the streaming services. So you can get it on Spotify and iTunes, which pick your poison, whichever one you like. It's there. Like Eric said, it's a short listen. So one song, I'll put it this way. One song is like a third of the album, almost. So a lot of the other, they're quick bites of psychedelic pop, art, poetry, nuggets of music, but check this one out. It is a nice contrast to LA Woman. So that'll do it for this one. Check us out on YouTube as well. If I haven't said that at the beginning, I'm saying it again now. If you've been with us this way throughout the whole thing, thanks for sticking with us on YouTube. We appreciate it as well. So for Eric, this has been Dean. We will catch you on the flip side.